The morning mist rolled through the valley like a soft blanket, settling over the small farm tucked away in the mountains of Nagano. Yuki wiped the sweat from her forehead as she tended to her tomato plants, the same way she had done every morning for the past 15 years. At 58, her hands were weathered but strong, her back straight despite the years of hard work. This simple life was everything she had ever wanted. Her nearest neighbor lived 3 miles down the winding mountain road. The isolation didn't bother her. In fact, she preferred it this way. The silence of the mountains, broken only by birdsong and the gentle rustle of bamboo groves, was a gift she treasured. No crowds, no noise, no expectations. Just her, the land, and the changing seasons. The villagers in the nearby town knew her as the quiet woman who sold organic vegetables at the weekend market. She was polite but never stayed to chat. She bought her supplies, exchanged pleasantries, and disappeared back into the mountains. Some thought she was a widow seeking solitude. Others assumed she was simply antisocial. Nobody asked too many questions. In rural Japan, people respected privacy. What they didn't know was that Yuki hadn't always lived this way. 15 years ago, her life had been completely different. Back then, her days were filled with precision, discipline, and the weight of expectations. She had been someone entirely different. Her farmhouse was modest but well-maintained. Wood beams darkened with age. Paper screens that filtered the morning light. A small Buddhist altar in the corner where she lit incense each evening. Everything had its place. Everything was orderly. This was how she liked things now. Simple and predictable. But tucked away in the attic, hidden beneath old blankets and forgotten boxes, was a part of her past she had carefully locked away. A wooden chest that hadn't been opened in over a decade. Inside that chest were things that told a very different story about who she used to be. On this particular autumn morning, something felt different. Yuki couldn't quite put her finger on it. She paused while watering her chrysanthemums and looked down the dirt road that led to her property. Fresh tire marks cut through the morning dew. That was unusual. The delivery truck never came on Tuesdays, and she wasn't expecting any visitors. She stood there for a moment studying the tracks. They were wide, deep. Multiple vehicles. Something in her gut tightened. An old instinct she thought she had buried long ago. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the feeling. Probably just someone who took a wrong turn. The mountain roads were confusing for outsiders. Still, the unease stayed with her throughout the day. As she worked in her garden, pulling weeds and checking her daikon radishes, her mind wandered back to those years she tried so hard to forget. The competitions, the pressure, the constant travel from one shooting range to another, carrying cases of equipment that weighed more than she did, the flash of cameras, the reporters asking the same questions over and over, the expectations of an entire nation watching her every move. She had been good at it. Better than good, actually. She had been exceptional. From the age of 16, when she first picked up a competition rifle at her school's sports club, she had shown a natural talent that shocked even the most experienced coaches. Her eyesight was perfect. Her hands were steady. But more than that, she had something that couldn't be taught. An ability to shut out the world and focus on nothing but the target in front of her. By 19, she was competing nationally. By 23, she had won her first Olympic trial. The newspapers called her a prodigy. Her face appeared on magazine covers. Young girls wanted to be like her. But with all that success came a pressure that slowly crushed the joy out of what she loved. Every competition became a test she couldn't afford to fail. Every shot had to be perfect. One small mistake and the headlines would turn cruel. The weight of representing her country, her coaches, her sponsors, it became too much. She started having panic attacks before competitions. Her hands would shake. The rifle that once felt like an extension of her body began to feel like a burden. So one day she walked away from it all. She sold her apartment in Tokyo, took her savings, and disappeared into these mountains. Her coaches called. Her sponsors threatened legal action. Reporters tracked her down for interviews. She refused them all. She wanted peace. She wanted to be forgotten, and slowly, mercifully, the world did forget. New champions emerged. The news cycle moved on. Yuki became just another person living a quiet rural life. The trophies and medals ended up in that chest in her attic, along with newspaper clippings that yellowed with age. She told herself she didn't miss it. The competition. The adrenaline. The perfect shot that made everything else disappear. She had traded all of that for this peaceful existence, and she was happy. Or at least that's what she told herself every morning when she woke up. As the sun began to set behind the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Yuki finished her evening chores. She fed her chickens, checked the fence posts, and swept the front porch. The temperature was dropping, and she could see her breath in the cool air. Winter would come early this year. She was about to head inside when she heard it. The low rumble of engines echoing through the valley. Not one vehicle. Several. She walked to the edge of her property and looked down the mountain road. In the fading light, she could make out 3 black SUVs making their way up the winding path. Toward her farm. Her heart began to beat faster. Nobody came up here, nobody. Especially not in vehicles like those. She knew what those cars meant. In rural areas like this, where land was valuable and the law was far away, there were people who took what they wanted through intimidation. Yuki stood there, watching the vehicles approach. Part of her wanted to run inside, lock the doors, and hope they would just pass by. But a deeper part of her, the part that had faced down Olympic pressure, that had performed under the eyes of millions, knew that running wouldn't help. The SUVs were getting closer now. She could hear the crunch of gravel under their tires. Her hands, which had been completely steady while gardening all day, now trembled slightly, not from fear exactly, from something else, something she hadn't felt in 15 years, adrenaline. She took a deep breath, the way her old coach had taught her before every competition. Clear your mind. Focus on what's in front of you. Everything else is just noise. The vehicles were almost at her gate now. She could see faces through the tinted windows. Men, several of them. She watched as the first SUV pulled to a stop at the edge of her property, its headlights cutting through the gathering darkness. Yuki turned and walked back toward her house, her steps measured and calm. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was simply going inside to prepare. Because somewhere deep in her bones she knew that her quiet life in the mountains was about to be interrupted, and when it was, she would need to remember who she used to be. The past she had tried so hard to bury was about to become very relevant again. The 3 black SUVs came to a stop just outside Yuki's wooden gate. Their engines idled for a moment before shutting off one by one. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. She watched from her window as 6 men stepped out of the vehicles, their expensive suits looking completely out of place against the backdrop of her simple mountain farm. They moved with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. The way they walked, the way they looked around her property as if they already owned it. Yuki had seen men like this before. Not here in the mountains, but back in Tokyo during her competition years. Men who thought money and intimidation could get them anything they wanted. The leader was easy to spot. He was the one walking in front, a man in his 40s with slicked back hair and a dark suit that probably cost more than her entire year's harvest. An elaborate tattoo crept up from his collar, disappearing beneath his shirt. She couldn't see all of it, but she didn't need to. She knew what it meant. They weren't here to ask nicely. Yuki stepped away from the window and moved to her front door. Her hands were steadier now. The initial shock had passed, replaced by something else. A calm clarity she remembered from her shooting days. When the pressure was highest, when everything was on the line, her mind would become perfectly still. Like the surface of a mountain lake before dawn. She opened the door before they could knock. The leader looked surprised for just a moment, then his face settled into a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Up close she could see more of the tattoo, a dragon's claw extending up his neck. The other men fanned out behind him, trying to look intimidating. 2 of them had their hands in their jacket pockets. She knew what that meant too. "Good evening," the leader said, his voice smooth but carrying an edge underneath. "You must be the owner of this property." "I am," Yuki replied simply. She didn't invite them in, didn't step aside, just stood in her doorway, a 58-year-old woman in work clothes facing down 6 men who clearly meant trouble. "My name is Takeshi. These are my associates." He gestured vaguely at the men behind him. "We're here to discuss a business opportunity." "I'm not interested in business," Yuki said. "I'm a farmer. That's all." Takeshi's smile widened slightly, but there was no warmth in it. "Perhaps you should hear what we have to offer before deciding." This land you're sitting on, it's very valuable. The view alone is worth millions. We have investors who are interested in developing this area, hotels, resorts. This whole mountain could become something special. It already is something special, Yuki said quietly. It's my home. One of the men behind Takeshi laughed, a harsh mocking sound. Takeshi held up a hand to silence him, but the smile had left his face now. Let me be more direct, he said, his voice dropping lower. We're prepared to offer you a generous price for this property. More than it's worth, honestly. You can take the money and buy a nice apartment in town. Live comfortably. No more working in the dirt like a peasant. Yuki felt something stir inside her. Anger, yes, but controlled, focused. I'm not a peasant. I'm a farmer. And this land is not for sale. The temperature seemed to drop. Takeshi's jaw tightened. Behind him, the other men shifted, their casual poses becoming more aggressive. One of them cracked his knuckles. Another pulled a hand from his pocket, letting her see the weapon he was carrying. Not a gun, but a knife in a leather sheath. Old woman, Takeshi said, and the false politeness was completely gone now. You don't understand the situation you're in. We're not asking. We've already purchased the 3 farms below you, the land on the ridge above you. You're the last holdout, the last problem standing in the way of a very profitable development. Then you'll have to find another place to develop, Yuki said. Her voice remained calm, almost conversational. It was the same tone she used to use when discussing shot placement with her coaches. Factual, unemotional. Because I'm not leaving. Takeshi stared at her for a long moment. Then he sighed like a disappointed parent dealing with a stubborn child. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is a contract. Simple terms. You sign over the deed to your property. We give you the money. Everyone walks away happy. No, Yuki said simply. Look around you. Takeshi gestured at her farm, her small house, her garden. What are you protecting? Some vegetables? A few chickens? You're an old woman living alone. What happens when you get sick? When you can't work anymore? You'll lose this place anyway. At least this way you get paid. I'm not interested in your money or your threats, Yuki said. Please leave my property. That was when the facade finally cracked. Takeshi's face twisted with anger. He nodded to one of his men, who immediately walked over to her garden and kicked over a basket of freshly harvested tomatoes. Red fruit splattered across the ground she had worked so carefully. Another man picked up a stone lantern that had belonged to her grandmother and smashed it against the ground. Yuki felt her jaw clench, but she didn't move, didn't react. Just watched. You see how easy it is? Takeshi said softly. How quickly things can be broken. We're being reasonable right now. We're offering you money. But if you continue to be stubborn, well, he let the threat hang in the air. Accidents happen in the mountains, fires, landslides, and the police? They're very far away. By the time they get here, there might not be anything left to save. He walked up to her, close enough that she could smell the expensive cologne he wore. I'm going to give you 1 hour to think about it. 1 hour to realize that you have no choice in this matter. We'll wait in our cars. When we come back, you'll sign the papers. Because if you don't... He looked past her into her house. Well, we'll have to convince you another way. The men retreated to their vehicles, leaving Yuki standing in her doorway. They didn't leave. They just sat there, engines off, smoking cigarettes and laughing among themselves, making sure she knew they weren't going anywhere. Yuki stepped back inside and quietly closed the door. Her hands were shaking now, but not from fear, from rage, from the violation of having her home, her sanctuary, threatened by men who thought power and violence solved everything. She walked to her kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. Drank it slowly. Her mind was already working through the problem the way she used to analyze shooting competitions. What were her options? She could call the police, but Takeshi was right. They were at least 40 minutes away, maybe more. By the time they arrived, these men could do serious damage. Or worse. She could try to reason with them, but she knew that wouldn't work. Men like Takeshi didn't respond to reason. They responded to strength, to consequences, to realizing they had made a mistake. Yuki set down her glass and looked at the ceiling, at the attic entrance above her. She hadn't climbed up there in years, had tried to forget what was hidden in that old wooden chest. But now, standing in her kitchen with threats and destruction waiting just outside her door, she realized something. Some parts of your past you can never really leave behind. Sometimes when the world forces your hand, you have to become who you used to be. Not because you want to, but because you have to. She pulled down the attic ladder and began to climb. The attic was dark and dusty. Yuki pulled the string for the single light bulb and it flickered to life, casting long shadows across boxes and old furniture she hadn't looked at in years. The air smelled of aged wood and memories. She had to crouch slightly under the low ceiling as she made her way toward the far corner. There it was, the wooden chest. It looked smaller than she remembered, simpler. Just an old military-style footlocker that could have contained anything. Winter clothes, photo albums, forgotten keepsakes. But Yuki knew better. Her hands found the lock, and for a moment she hesitated. Opening this chest meant opening a door she had spent 15 years trying to keep closed. The key was hidden in a small tin box nearby. Her fingers remembered where it was, even though her mind had tried to forget. The lock clicked open smoothly. She had oiled it regularly. Even though she told herself she would never open it again, some habits die hard. The lid creaked as she lifted it. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth that was still soft despite the years, lay her rifles. 3 of them, each one a precision instrument that had cost more than most people's cars. She had maintained them religiously even after retiring. Every 6 months she would climb up here, check them, clean them, oil them, and wrap them back up. She never asked herself why. It just felt wrong to let them deteriorate. Her competition rifle was on top. A beautiful piece of engineering, German-made, custom-fitted to her measurements. The weight of it in her hands brought back a flood of memories. The feeling of looking down the sight, the absolute stillness required before pulling the trigger, the satisfaction of a perfect shot. Beside the rifles were boxes of ammunition, competition rounds, carefully stored in climate-controlled containers. Below those were her medals, gold, silver, bronze, each one representing countless hours of practice. Newspaper clippings carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. Photos of a younger version of herself standing on podiums, holding trophies, smiling for cameras. One photo caught her eye. She was 25 in it, right after winning the national championship for the 3rd consecutive year. The headline read, "Japan's sharpshooter, Yuki proves women can outshoot anyone." She remembered that day. The pressure, the expectation, the way her hands hadn't trembled even once. She set the photo down and focused on the rifle. This wasn't about nostalgia. This was about survival. Yuki checked the rifle methodically, her hands moving through the familiar motions. She verified the action, checked the barrel, examined the sight. Everything was in perfect condition. She had made sure of that even when she didn't know why it mattered. She loaded the magazine with competition rounds, smaller caliber ammunition designed for precision, not power. These bullets were made to hit exactly where you aimed them. Nothing more, nothing less. She had no intention of seriously hurting anyone. That had never been her way, and it wouldn't start now. But she needed these men to understand they had made a serious mistake. As she prepared, her mind was already calculating. Distance from the second-floor balcony to the front yard, about 30 meters. Wind conditions, minimal. The evening was calm. Light, fading, but still adequate for the kind of shooting she used to do. Targets, she wasn't thinking of the men as targets. She was thinking about what she could hit near them. Warning shots that would make a point. From downstairs, she heard a loud crash. The sound of breaking glass. Her greenhouse. They were already starting. Yuki took a deep breath. Then another. This was just like the competitions. You had to control your breathing. Control your heartbeat. Let everything else fade away except the task in front of you. She descended the ladder carefully, rifle in hand. In her bedroom, she opened her closet and found an old shooting jacket she hadn't worn in years. It still fit, though. It was snugger than she remembered. She pulled it on and checked the pockets. They still held what she needed: extra magazines, lens cleaning cloth, rangefinder. Through her window, she could see the men outside. They were getting bored, getting aggressive. One of them was throwing rocks at her solar panels. Another was urinating on her garden fence. They were making sure she could see them, trying to intimidate her. Takeshi was leaning against his SUV, smoking a cigarette and checking his watch. Patient, confident, completely certain that this old woman would break. Yuki picked up her phone and dialed emergency services. When the operator answered, she calmly explained the situation. Men were threatening her property. She needed police assistance. Yes, she understood they were 40 minutes away. No, she wasn't in immediate danger yet. She would handle the situation until they arrived. The operator seemed confused by her calm tone but took down the information. Yuki ended the call and set the phone aside. 40 minutes. She needed to make this last 40 minutes without anyone getting seriously hurt. It was like a competition with a time limit. She had done those before. She walked to the balcony door on the second floor. It faced the front yard where the men were waiting. She unlocked it quietly and stepped out into the cool evening air. The sun had set behind the mountains, leaving that strange purple-blue twilight that made everything seem unreal. For a moment she just stood there, breathing, remembering. Her coach used to say that shooting was 90% mental. You had to believe you could make the shot before you ever pulled the trigger. Doubt was the enemy. Hesitation was failure. Yuki had never doubted herself in competition, not once. And she wasn't going to start now. She looked down at the rifle in her hands, at the men destroying her property below, at the peaceful farm she had built for herself being threatened by people who thought violence was the answer to everything. Something her old coach used to say came back to her. A rifle in the hands of someone who knows how to use it isn't a weapon. It's a conversation, and sometimes that's the only language certain people understand. She had never fully understood what he meant until now. Yuki checked her rifle one more time, adjusted the sight, felt the familiar weight settle into her shoulder. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate steadied, everything around her seemed to sharpen into perfect focus. This was the feeling she had chased for years in competition. The moment before the shot when the entire world contracted to just you, the rifle and the target. Below her, she heard Takeshi call out to his men. Time's up. Let's go remind our friend what happens when she doesn't cooperate. The men started moving toward her house. One of them picked up a metal pipe from somewhere. Another pulled out his knife. They were done playing games. Yuki stepped forward to the balcony railing, rifle in plain view. Gentlemen, she called down, her voice cutting through the evening air. Clear, steady, absolutely calm. I suggest you reconsider. The men stopped, looked up. For a moment there was confused silence. Then they started laughing. The sight of a small elderly woman in an old shooting jacket holding a rifle seemed hilarious to them. One of them actually bent over, laughing so hard he had to catch his breath. Takeshi wasn't laughing. He was staring at her with narrowed eyes, trying to figure out if this was a bluff. Then he smiled, that same cold smile from before. Old woman, he called up. Put that down before you hurt yourself. You probably don't even know how to. The shot rang out before he finished his sentence. The cigarette he was holding exploded into tiny fragments of paper and tobacco. He didn't even have time to feel the bullet pass by his fingers. The sound echoed off the mountains and faded into silence. Nobody was laughing anymore. The cigarette fragments drifted to the ground like snow. Takeshi stood frozen, his hand still raised to his mouth where the cigarette had been a second earlier. His fingers trembled slightly as he slowly lowered them, staring at the empty space between them. He hadn't felt anything. No heat, no impact. Just suddenly his cigarette was gone, destroyed with surgical precision. The other men had stopped moving entirely. The one with the metal pipe let it slip from his fingers. It hit the ground with a dull clang that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. That was your only warning, Yuki called down from the balcony. Her voice was different now. Not the quiet farmer they had been threatening. This was the voice of someone who had performed under pressure in front of thousands of people. Calm, authoritative, absolutely certain. The next person who moves toward my house will regret it. One of the younger men, the one who had been laughing the hardest, pulled out his knife. Maybe it was bravado. Maybe he genuinely didn't understand what had just happened. He took a step forward. Yuki didn't hesitate. The rifle barked again. The knife flew out of his hand, spinning through the air before clattering against one of the SUVs. The man looked at his empty hand, then at the knife 15 feet away, then back at his hand. A thin red line appeared across his palm where the bullet had grazed him. Not even deep enough to need stitches, but enough to make the point crystal clear. He stumbled backward, cradling his hand, his face white with shock. She shot me, he stammered. That crazy woman actually shot me. No, Yuki said calmly, already repositioning for the next shot. If I had shot you, you would know it. That was just encouragement to drop what you were holding. Another man reached into his jacket. Before his hand emerged, a bullet struck the side mirror of the lead SUV, exploding it into a shower of glass and plastic. The man's hand froze inside his jacket. I wouldn't recommend it, Yuki said. Whatever you're reaching for won't help you. Not at this distance. Not against someone who can count the buttons on your shirt from up here. The man slowly withdrew his empty hand and raised both arms slightly. Takeshi had recovered from his initial shock. His face was red with anger and embarrassment. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? Do you know what we can do to you? We have connections, resources. You can't just... The fourth shot took out the antenna on his SUV. The fifth shattered the windshield of the middle vehicle. The sixth destroyed a headlight. Each shot came within seconds of the last, smooth and controlled. No rush, no panic, just perfect execution. I'm counting my shots, Yuki said. I have plenty more where those came from. And I'm not even breathing hard yet. Would you like me to continue this demonstration? One of the men, the smartest one apparently, started backing toward the vehicles. Boss, maybe we should... Stay where you are, Takeshi snapped, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. He was staring up at Yuki, trying to reconcile what he was seeing. This wasn't possible. Old women didn't shoot like this. Nobody shot like this. The precision, the speed, the absolute confidence in every movement. Who are you? He finally asked. I told you already, Yuki replied. I'm a farmer. This is my home, and you've made a very serious mistake coming here. She adjusted her stance slightly, and every man below flinched. She could see them calculating. Could see the exact moment when their certainty turned to doubt. They had weapons. They had numbers. But none of that mattered when facing someone who could shoot the buttons off their shirts before they could blink. Let me be very clear about something, Yuki continued. Her rifle was still raised, still ready. Every shot I've fired tonight could have been fatal. Every single one. The cigarette could have been his eye. The knife could have been his hand. The car parts could have been your heads. I chose not to. But that choice is mine to make, not yours. The man with the grazed palm was whimpering now, still staring at his hand. His friends were edging away from him as if his injury might be contagious. You came to my home, Yuki said, her voice hardening. You destroyed my grandmother's lantern, my tomatoes, my greenhouse. You threatened me. You thought because I'm old, because I'm alone, because I'm a woman, that I would be easy, that I would be afraid. Another shot. This one hit the ground between Takeshi's feet, kicking up dust and gravel that peppered his expensive shoes. He jumped back involuntarily. I spent 27 years competing at the highest levels of precision shooting. I have 17 national championship titles. I represented Japan in international competitions. I held world records, but you didn't bother to research who lived on this property. You just saw an old woman and assumed she was helpless. She paused, letting that sink in. Then she continued in a voice that carried across the entire property. My name is Yuki Nakamura. If you have access to the internet, I suggest you look me up. You'll find plenty of articles, plenty of videos. You'll see what I could do 20 years ago when I was at my peak. And then you can imagine what I can still do now. Standing on my own property, defending my own home with nothing to lose and plenty of ammunition. The recognition hit Takeshi's face like a physical blow. His eyes went wide. Even someone who didn't follow shooting sports had heard of Yuki Nakamura. She had been famous, a legend. The newspapers had called her the Eagle Eye of Japan. You're that, he stammered. Yes, Yuki said simply. I'm that woman. The one you thought had disappeared. The one who walked away from fame to live in peace. And you've disrupted that peace. The police are on their way. They'll be here in about 35 minutes. I suggest you be gone in 30. One of the men was already climbing into an SUV. Then another. The panic was spreading through the group like wildfire. They had come here expecting an easy target. An old woman they could intimidate with threats and violence. Instead, they had found something completely different. Something dangerous. This isn't over, Takeshi said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was already backing toward his vehicle. You can't hide up here forever. We have people everywhere. The next shot took off his side view mirror. The one after that destroyed his other headlight. Yuki was no longer aiming around them. She was systematically disabling their vehicles, showing them exactly how trapped they actually were. I'm not hiding, Yuki said. I'm standing on my property defending my home. And if you come back, I'll be right here, waiting. with a rifle that never misses and a memory that doesn't forget faces. I know what all of you look like now. I could describe each of you to the police in perfect detail. I could pick you out of a crowd from 100 meters away. That did it. The remaining men scrambled for their vehicles. Engines roared to life. The man with the injured hand was practically thrown into the back seat by his companions. Takeshi stood there for one more moment, his pride warring with his survival instinct. Then he made the smart choice. He got in his SUV. I know your license plate numbers too, Yuki called out as they started backing up. And I've recorded this entire conversation on my phone. So if anything happens to me, if my farm mysteriously catches fire, if I have any accidents, the police will know exactly where to look. It was a bluff. She hadn't recorded anything. But they didn't know that. And at this point, they were too scared to question it. The SUVs tore down the mountain road, throwing up dust and gravel, their damaged headlights making them swerve dangerously. Yuki watched them go, her rifle still raised until the sound of their engines faded completely into the distance. Only then did she lower the weapon. Only then did she let out the breath she had been holding. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up with her. But she had done it. She had protected her home. And she had done it without seriously hurting anyone. She looked down at the rifle in her hands, at the empty shell casings scattered around her feet, at the damage to the vehicles that were now disappearing down the mountain. Still got it, she whispered to herself, and despite everything, she smiled. The police arrived 32 minutes later, their lights cutting through the darkness as they carefully navigated the mountain road. By then, Yuki had already cleaned her rifle, wrapped it back in its cloth, and returned it to the chest in the attic. She had swept up the shell casings and placed them in a small box as evidence. She had even made herself a cup of tea. When the officers stepped out of their patrol car, they found her sitting on her front porch, the same way she did every evening, just a quiet woman in her late 50s looking completely calm. If not for the damaged property around her, the broken lantern, the scattered tomatoes, the shattered greenhouse glass, they might have thought they had the wrong address. The senior officer, a man named Officer Hayashi who had been with the force for 20 years, approached cautiously. Ma'am, we received a call about men threatening your property. Yes, Yuki said, gesturing to a chair beside her. Please sit. Would you like some tea? Hayashi blinked, clearly not expecting such hospitality. His younger partner was already photographing the damage with his phone, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. What happened here? Hayashi asked as he sat down, pulling out a notebook. Yuki told him everything. The arrival of the vehicles, the threats, the demands for her property, the escalating violence. She described each man in perfect detail, their heights, builds, the tattoo on Takeshi's neck, the specific make and model of their SUVs, even the license plate numbers she had memorized. Hayashi's pen moved faster and faster across his notebook. This wasn't the confused, frightened testimony he usually got from elderly victims. This was precise, professional, almost like a military report. And then what happened? He asked. I defended my property, Yuki said simply. She retrieved the box of shell casings and handed it to him. I fired several warning shots. I made it clear they were not welcome. They left. The younger officer had wandered over to one of the areas where bullets had struck. Senpai, he called out, using the respectful term for his senior partner. You need to see this. Hayashi walked over. The officer was pointing at a spot on the ground between two distinct boot prints. The shot placement, he said quietly. It's perfectly centered. And look at this. He gestured to the destroyed car mirror pieces scattered nearby. These aren't wild shots from someone panicking. This is precision shooting. Hayashi turned back to Yuki, his expression changing. Ma'am, do you have experience with firearms? Some, Yuki said. Then after a pause, she added, I used to compete. Compete? Hayashi asked. In shooting sports, many years ago. The younger officer had pulled out his phone and was typing something. Suddenly his face went pale. Senpai, look at this. He showed his senior partner the screen. Hayashi read whatever was there, his eyebrows climbing higher and higher. He looked at Yuki, back at the phone. Back at Yuki again. You're Yuki Nakamura, he said slowly. The Yuki Nakamura? The Olympic trial champion. The one they called the Eagle Eye. Yuki sipped her tea. I was. A long time ago. There are videos, the young officer said, still staring at his phone in amazement. You shot perfect scores in competitions. Multiple world records. You were famous. I preferred to leave that life behind, Yuki said. I came here for peace. These men disrupted that peace. Hayashi sat back down, his entire demeanor changed. Ma'am, we need to ask, the men who came here. Were any of them injured? One has a minor scratch on his palm. Nothing serious. Everything else I shot was property or ground. I never aimed at anyone directly, just close enough to make a point. And you're certain these men were connected to organized crime? The tattoos. The vehicles. The way they operated. Yes, I'm certain. Hayashi nodded grimly. He had been a police officer long enough to recognize the pattern. Rural land grabs had become more common in recent years. Criminal organizations buying up mountain properties for development, using intimidation when owners refused to sell. We'll put out alerts for the vehicles, he said. With the descriptions you've provided and the license plates, we should be able to locate them. The damaged vehicles will make them easy to spot. As if on cue, his radio crackled to life. A checkpoint officer reporting 3 black SUVs with front-end damage, attempting to leave the prefecture. Occupants acting suspicious. One with a hand injury. They were being detained for questioning. Hayashi smiled. That was fast. They didn't seem very intelligent, Yuki observed. They researched the property but not the owner. A critical mistake. Over the next few hours, more police arrived. Investigators photographed everything. They found the tire marks from the SUVs, the footprints, the cigarette butts Takeshi had dropped. Every piece of evidence that would build a case. The story spread quickly. By morning, a local news crew had somehow gotten wind of what happened. They arrived asking for interviews. Yuki politely declined, but that didn't stop the story. Someone had leaked information to the press. Maybe one of the younger officers excited about meeting a legend. Maybe someone at the checkpoint where the criminals were detained. By afternoon, the story was on regional news. Retired shooting champion defends farm from criminal gang. By evening, it had gone national. By the next morning, it was trending on social media.